Beyond the dark horizon lies a story that no one else is brave enough to tell the world. We sail into the unknown to bring you the raw, unfiltered truth of the human experience. Subscribe now and follow us to the edge of the world and back again.
The bakery had a bell above the door that my grandmother installed herself in 1987. She was 62 years old, standing on a step stool, and according to the story she told me approximately 400 times, she hung that bell crooked on purpose because she wanted everyone who walked in to hear it twice. Once when the door opened and once when it settled back into place. Two sounds, two hellos. I grew up hearing that bell. I know the exact pitch of it. I know the way it sounds different in winter, when the cold makes the metal contract slightly, and I know the way it sounds in summer, when the humidity makes the door stick just a little before it swings. That bakery on Clement Street was not just a business. It was the first place I ever felt like I belonged to something larger than myself. My grandmother's name was Rose. She came to San Francisco from Ohio in 1971 with $40, a suitcase, and a recipe box that had belonged to her mother. She built everything from nothing. She used to say that the secret to a good life was the same as the secret to a good pie crust. You had to be patient. You could not rush it, and you could not handle it too much, or it would fall apart on you. She was the most patient person I have ever known. I am her granddaughter. I am an accountant. I have been working at the same firm for 6 years, and I am the kind of person who reads contracts the way other people read novels. Slowly, carefully, with a pencil in my hand. My grandmother used to laugh at me for that. She would say, "Sweetheart, not everything in life has a footnote." She was wrong about that, it turns out. My sister is 3 years older than me. We grew up in the same house, ate the same dinners, spent every Saturday at that bakery helping my grandmother fold napkins and restock the display case. We had the same childhood. I do not fully understand how two people can come from the same place and want such completely different things. My sister married well, as people used to say. Her husband has a good job. They have a nice house in Marin, and their life looks exactly the way a life is supposed to look from the outside. But I noticed, over the years, that she stopped coming to help at the bakery. First it was the baby, and that was fair enough. Then it was the commute. Then it was just, she was busy. She was always busy with something. My grandmother never said a word about it. She just kept making her pies and her sourdough and her apple fritters, and she kept asking me when I was going to find someone nice, and she kept that crooked bell on the door. When my grandmother got sick, I was the one who managed her care. I want to be clear about that, not because I want credit for it, but because it becomes important later. I was the one who talked to the doctors. I was the one who researched the in-home nursing options and interviewed 3 different agencies before I found someone my grandmother actually liked. I was the one who reorganized her medications and set up the weekly pill organizers and learned, over the course of about 4 months, more about kidney function than I ever expected to know. My sister called on Sundays, usually for about 15 minutes. She sent flowers twice. During this time, my sister started coming around more. Not to help, or not exactly. She would stop by the bakery on weekday afternoons when I was usually at work, and she would sit with my grandmother and have tea. I know this because my grandmother mentioned it. In passing, the way she mentioned things she was not sure how to contextualize. She would say, "Your sister came by yesterday," and then she would move on to something else, and I would think, that's good, and I would not push further. I noticed, though, that after these visits, my grandmother seemed quieter. Not sad exactly, just thoughtful, like she was turning something over in her mind. I did not know what they were talking about. I found out later that my sister had been asking, gently and persistently, about the business, about the building. My grandmother owned the building outright. She had paid off the mortgage in 2009, which she considered one of the great achievements of her life. The property was worth considerably more now than it had been then. San Francisco has a way of doing that to things. My sister had been asking whether my grandmother had thought about selling, whether she had considered what the proceeds could do for the family, whether she understood how much things had changed in the neighborhood, how the market was, how this might be the right time. I did not know any of this. My grandmother did not tell me. What she did tell me, about 2 months before she died, was that she wanted to update her will. She said it in the matter-of-fact way she said most things, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, like it was just another item to get through. She said she had been thinking about it, and she wanted to make sure things were clear. She asked if I could recommend a good estate attorney. I gave her the name of someone at my firm, a woman I trusted. I did not ask my grandmother what changes she was making. It felt intrusive. She was a private person and she had always handled her own affairs, and I was not going to start treating her like someone who needed to be managed just because she was sick. She was still herself. She was still herself. She still caught math errors in the bakery's books before I did, even from her kitchen table. The attorney came to the house twice. My grandmother met with her alone both times. My sister did not know about these meetings as far as I could tell. My grandmother died on a Tuesday morning in March. It was early, around 5:30, and the hospice nurse called me and I drove across the city in the dark, and I sat with my grandmother for a long time before I called anyone else. The bakery was dark when I passed it. The closed sign was in the window. I had put it there 2 weeks earlier when it became clear she was not going to be well enough to open again. I sat with her and I thought about the bell above the door. I called my sister at 7. She cried, which surprised me a little, not because I didn't think she loved our grandmother, but because she had seemed so practical about all of it leading up to this. She said she would come over right away. She asked if there was anything she needed to bring. I said no. I said just come. She came with her husband. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets looking vaguely uncomfortable, the way he always did in spaces that were not his own. My sister hugged me and then walked through the house slowly, touching things. The kitchen table, the curtains, the shelf where my grandmother kept her recipe box. That should have been the first sign. I was too tired to see it. The next few days were what those days always are. There is so much to do when someone dies that you almost do not have time to feel anything. Phone calls and arrangements and the question of what to do about the bakery in the immediate term, whether to put a notice in the window or let people figure it out. I chose the notice. I wrote it myself and I taped it to the inside of the glass, just below the bell. My sister was helpful in the way that she could be helpful when she was engaged. She made food. She called relatives. She sat with me at the kitchen table the first night and we talked about our grandmother for a long time, just the two of us, and it was one of the more honest conversations we had had in years. I thought that maybe this was going to bring us closer together. Loss does that sometimes. I had seen it happen with other families. On the third day, her husband mentioned the building. He did it the way people do things they have been planning, casually, like it had just occurred to him. We were having coffee and he said something about what a remarkable asset it was, how San Francisco commercial real estate had been insane lately, how it was probably worth getting an appraisal done sooner rather than later, just so we understood what we were dealing with. I said that we didn't know yet what the will said, that we should wait for the reading. He nodded and said, of course, of course. And then the subject changed. My sister cornered me in the kitchen 20 minutes later. She was not unkind about it. She never is. That's the thing about her. She is never unkind in a way that you can point to directly. She said she just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. She said that selling made sense, that neither of us could run a bakery, that the money could set both of us up for a long time, and that grandmother would have wanted us to be practical. I said I did not know what grandmother would have wanted, and that was why we were going to wait and hear what the will said. She looked at me in a way I recognized from childhood, but she was deciding whether to push. She did not push. The will was read the following week. I sat in the attorney's office, the same woman I had referred my grandmother to, and my sister sat next to me with her husband, and the attorney read through everything clearly and without a lot of preamble. My grandmother had left the bakery to me, the building, the business, the equipment, the recipe box, the lease on the apartment upstairs, and a small savings account she had been keeping separately, all of it. There was a letter attached explaining her reasoning, in her own words, which the attorney handed to me, and which I have not shared with anyone because it is mine. My sister received a meaningful sum of money from a separate account. It was not nothing. It was genuinely substantial. There was a long silence after the attorney finished reading. My sister said, "That's not right." The attorney looked at her calmly and said that it reflected your grandmother's wishes as she expressed them clearly and consistently across 2 meetings conducted without duress. My sister said that our grandmother had been sick and that someone had clearly influenced her. The attorney, who had met with my grandmother twice and formed her own opinion, did not respond to that. I did not say anything either. I looked at the table. I thought about the bell. The drive home was quiet. My sister texted me that evening. The text was long and it said a lot of things, some of which were true and some of which were not. It said that I had been manipulating our grandmother. It said that I had used my position, my relationship with the attorney, my role in managing her care, to influence the outcome of the will. It said that this was not over. I put my phone down and I sat with that for a while. I want to be honest here about what I felt, because I think people imagine that when you win something like this, and I am using that word loosely, because winning is not really the right frame for what happens when your grandmother dies. You feel triumphant. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and sad, and also underneath that, I felt something like clarity. Like a fog I had not known was there had lifted. My sister hired an attorney. I know this because I received a letter about 2 weeks after the reading. Her attorney claimed undue influence, claimed my grandmother had not been in full capacity, claimed the will should be contested. It was a serious letter and I took it seriously. I brought it to my firm and I talked through my options. I had, as it happened, kept very thorough records of my grandmother's care. I had emails from her doctors. I had notes from the in-home nurse. I had the signed and witnessed documentation from 2 meetings with the estate attorney. My grandmother had also, and I had not known this until the attorney told me, specifically addressed the question of undue influence in the letter she left. She had anticipated that this might happen and she had written about it directly, clearly, in her own handwriting, describing exactly what her reasoning was and exactly what pressures, if any, she had been under. She had been under none. She had been clear-minded. She had been clear-minded. She had been, until the very end, more organized than most people I know. My sister's attorney sent 2 more letters. I responded to each one through my own attorney. Then things went quiet. What happened after that was not dramatic. There was no courtroom moment. There was no confrontation where I said the perfect thing, and my sister crumbled. It just stopped. I think her attorney looked at what we had and told her that she was not going to win. And she made the practical decision not to keep paying someone to pursue a case that wasn't going to go anywhere. She called me in June, 3 months after my grandmother died. It was a strange conversation. She did not apologize. Not exactly. She said that she had been grieving and had not handled things well. She said she hoped we could find our way back to each other eventually. She said she knew our grandmother would have wanted that. I said I hope so too. And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. I am not someone who wants to carry this. I have watched people carry things like this for decades, and I have seen what it does to them, how it calcifies inside them and makes them hard and small. I do not want to be hard and small, but I also understand now, something that I did not fully understand before, that love is not the same as trust, that you can love someone and still need to be careful around them. That family is not an excuse, and proximity to someone's grief is not the same as sharing it. I reopened the bakery in May. It took longer than I expected to get everything sorted. Licenses, staffing, an updated commercial kitchen inspection, a new point of sale system because the old one was genuinely archaic. I hired a baker named Dorothy who has been doing this for 30 years and has strong opinions about laminated dough that I find both intimidating and reassuring. I kept all of my grandmother's original recipes. I changed almost nothing else. The first morning we reopened, I stood inside before we unlocked the door. It was early, and the light was coming through the front windows, in that way it does in San Francisco in late spring, where everything looks slightly unreal. The display case was full. The coffee was on. The whole place smelled exactly the way it always had. I reached up and touched the bell. It was still crooked. 2 sounds. 2 hellos, just the way she hung it. I unlocked the door. What has stayed with me in the months since is not the anger. The anger was there and it was real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. What has stayed with me is something quieter. My grandmother knew. She knew what my sister was asking, and she knew why, and she made her decision anyway. Not out of spite, I don't think, but out of clarity. She had spent her whole life being patient and careful and watching, and she knew exactly who had shown up and who had not. She left me a letter. I have read it many times. I am not going to quote from it because it belongs to me and to her, but I will say that it did not say what I expected it to say. It was not about the business or the building or any of the practical things. It was about the window seat. There's a small bench built into the wall near the front of the bakery, just below the main window, where I used to sit as a child and do my homework while she worked. She wrote about that. She wrote about watching me sit there with my books and my pencil, serious and small, and how she had known then what kind of person I was going to be. She said she was glad she was right. I think about that bench a lot now when things are hard, when there's a staffing problem or a supplier issue or a month where the numbers are tighter than I would like them to be. I go and I stand by that window and I remember what she knew about me before I knew it about myself. The bell is still crooked. I have had 3 different people offer to fix it. I tell them no every time. I have thought a lot about what my grandmother understood that I did not. She watched 2 granddaughters grow up in the same house, eat at the same table, stand behind the same display case on Saturday mornings, folding the same napkins. And somewhere along the way, quietly, without making it a conversation or a judgment, she formed a very clear picture of who each of us was. Not who we said we were. Not who we presented ourselves as being at holidays and Sunday phone calls. Who won. Actually won. When a situation asked something of us, and we either showed up or we didn't. That is the thing about time. It does not lie. You cannot charm it, or manage it, or send it flowers twice and call it even. It just keeps moving, and it keeps a record of everything you did and did not do while it was passing. My sister is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. She loves our grandmother, loved her. That grief on the phone was real, but love without action has a ceiling, and my grandmother understood that ceiling better than either of us did. She watched my sister pull away year after year for reasons that were always reasonable and never quite added up to presents. And she watched me show up, not because I was angling for anything, but because it did not occur to me not to. That is the part that took me a long time to understand. I was not building a case. I was just living the way I thought you were supposed to live. You take care of the people you love, you learn their medications, you sit with them in the early mornings when they cannot sleep, and you do not make it about you. I did not do those things to earn anything. I did them because Rose was my grandmother, and she had given me so much, and it seemed like the only honest response was to give something back. She saw that. She saw all of it, from her kitchen table, with her coffee and her recipe box, and her sharp eyes that did not miss much. And when the time came to make a decision, she made it clearly, in writing, with a witness, in full possession of herself. That is what my sister's attorney could not get past. Not my influence, not my position at the firm, just the plain, documented fact of a woman who knew her own mind and acted on it. What I have carried from all of this is something I am still figuring out how to put into words. It has something to do with the difference between being strategic and being honest. My sister came to those afternoon visits with a purpose. I came to my grandmother's kitchen with a casserole and a pill organizer and approximately no agenda. One of those approaches built something real over decades. The other one ran out of road the moment it needed to hold weight. I think that is how it usually works. Not always quickly, not always visibly, but eventually the things you actually are catch up with you, for better or for worse. The record that time keeps doesn't care about your intentions or your explanations. It only knows what you did on an ordinary Tuesday when no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed. The bakery is open. The bell is crooked. Dorothy made a flawless kuchinamana this morning that 3 customers came back to ask about before noon. I think my grandmother would have had notes on the lamination. She always had notes, but I think she would have been glad.